Yeah, so good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us here, even though I know that it's for many people across Europe a day off. But still, welcome to this session on the datafication of SMEs in the south of the Netherlands. We got a lot of questions about our experiences there in the past few years. And well, first of all, I'd like to say thank you to the BDVA and the other organizers to be able to share our experiences here today. So datafication, what is it? SMEs, we all know what they are, but where are they? In our case, they're in the south of the Netherlands. So you can see a picture here of the Netherlands. We as TNO, we are working on a national level, but in this case, we are specifically talking about the organizations working with us in the southern part of the Netherlands, where there's a big chunk of our operations. I'm joined here today by several colleagues. I'm not alone. In my case, my name is Matthijs Punter. I'm working as a senior consultant at TNO, the Netherlands Organization for Applied Scientific Research. We're a non-profit organization working for industry and governments to promote innovation, to bring innovations from academia into day-to-day business practice. And I'm mainly doing that on the topic of digital and datafication. As said, I'm joined here by two colleagues, one from TNO, that's Simon. Maybe Simon, you can also say hi.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Simon Dalmolen, and I'm an architect, also on business as well on technical level regarding data spaces and setting up data spaces.
Yes. And we don't do these things alone. We work with a lot of partners in our ecosystem. I will tell a bit more about that later, but the key partner in this is Jets and Fabian Kok. Maybe you can also introduce yourself.
Yeah, I'm Fabian. I'm from Jets. I'm a project manager at the Sme Data Lab, and well, more about that later.
All right. Thanks. Thanks for joining in. In the meantime, if you have any questions during this session or remarks or suggestions, feel free to add them to the chat. We will be monitoring the chat as we go along. And during the session, at several points, we will take some time to go through it. But feel free to put that in the chat. I think it's on the bottom of this screen. So datafication, data for business. What businesses are we talking about? Let's start with that in the south of the Netherlands. We have some well-known names there. You see Philips, who used to be active in the field of consumer electronics, but they still are to some extent, but they have really transformed in the past few years into a high-tech company focusing on the medical domain, using, for instance, as you can see here on the top right, scanners and imaging technologies which are used in hospitals across the world. Another name in high-tech is ASML. We are really counting on ASML to help address the worldwide shortage of microchips as they create and build the latest generation of lithography machines, which are needed to actually produce those microchips. And they are a world leader in that. Now you might say, okay, high-tech, large companies, what does this have to do with SMEs? Well, we are actually very fortunate that they put a lot of emphasis on their supply network. And their suppliers are in many cases SMEs. Of course, there are some large companies as well. But we're really talking about hundreds of manufacturing companies active in the high-tech domain, which supply to, for instance, ASML or Philips or other high-tech OEMs in the area. So it's really a characteristic for the Netherlands, and many of those companies are based in the southern part of the Netherlands. But it's not only high-tech. Due to its location in Europe, there are also a large number of logistics companies providing transport and other logistics services, as it is really in between main ports of like Rotterdam and Antwerp to the west, and the big European hinterland, Cologne, Frankfurt, and further ahead, towards the east and towards the south. And because of this geography, many logistics companies have chosen to settle in this region. And there too, we have some larger names, but also a large number of SMEs which are active in this field. And these are just some of the characteristics. So you have large companies, but also many small companies active in high-value industries such as high-tech, but also in more high-volume industries such as logistics. Traditionally, also in the agro-food sector, lots of activities are taking place in this area, increasingly moving towards life sciences and higher tier technologies there. In the West, we have lots of industrial activities, lots of chemical plants which are currently transitioning from fossil-based processes to more carbon-neutral processes. And because of that, we also have a large number of companies active in the field of maintenance of chemical installations and other things. So it is a wide spectrum of companies which we are supporting here in this region. Some high-value industries, some also more high-volume industries. And some years ago, one of the provinces, the Netherlands is divided into several provinces. The south is covered by the province of Zeeland, the province of North Brabant, and the province of Limburg, to the bottom right. But the province of Brabant did an investigation into the role of data in those processes in the economy. Then obviously that is open for debate, because how do you actually define the role of data? Well, they did some assumptions there, both on a regional, national, and international level. But the trend was actually quite clear. That is that more and more companies rely on data for their operational processes, for their long-term success, for their strategic positioning. And there is also an increasing number of companies which is just focused on data, on the extraction of data, on the exchange of data, using additional value, using data. So the importance of data in the economy as a whole is growing significantly. And you can see that here in the numbers. And to me personally, it's not the exact figure which is the most important, even though these figures are quite significant, but it is especially the growth which you see here. The growth in terms of the volume of the data economy, but also the growth in terms of people who are active in this field, and then as you think along, the skill sets which are needed for this, and so on. So this really is a trend. But then if you zoom into SMEs in particular, it was also investigated how mature the companies then are in terms of data. So how well are they capable to deal with data, whether it is extracting data or using data or really using it as a business tool and as a transformational force. And it was divided into 5 levels, ranging from, well, we call it base, let's say flight level 0, where there was not really a vision of datafication. So companies were not really aware of what was happening, what would be needed. A step further is that they had a little bit of awareness, but actually no insight in the quality and consistency of the data within their company, let alone with the companies they would do business with. But they were aware, so we call that the controlled level. And then as you move on all the way into the innovative level, where data is really the basis for new products, new services, and companies have really transformed. Now this level, it's quite clear that not all companies will and should reach this. Again, if you look at the structure of the economy, many of the benefits of data will come through the more efficient or more innovative delivery of high-tech products, maintenance solutions, and so on. But it was telling that for each of those sectors, the majority is still, well, either at the base level or really at the control level. So they are aware of the importance of dealing with data, but they don't yet have any insight in the quality, the consistency, or actually what to do with it. Fortunately, there's also quite a significant group, and in some areas, for instance, in life sciences, also the majority group, which actually does use data to some extent to improve their business operations. So the majority varies. And in this very same research, also the question was raised, what are the barriers for datafication? So what barriers exist? Why don't you move up to a higher level? And these were categorized in several categories, as you can see here on the right side of the picture. So unfortunately, still many companies indicated that there was a lack of awareness, maybe not with everyone in the organization, but especially with a large chunk of the people working in the organization, a lack of awareness into what data could be. Also related to the expertise, so lack of skills to deal with data, and sometimes even resistance within the organization. What will happen if the data scientists come along, if new improvements are made using data? What does it mean for the existing work in the company? What does it mean for the workforce? What does it mean for you as a person working in such an organization? And this could potentially lead to resistance, and companies indicate that this is a barrier to them. Nevertheless, there was also a large group of organizations looking into other aspects, which should not be underestimated, like security and privacy, like the trust in data in various aspects, trust in general, or the trust in software and solutions. So this is really sort of an underlying stream of barriers which also should be tackled if we are to increase the data maturity of SMEs. So based on this research, we came to several conclusions. We need to make organizations more aware of the potential of data, what it can bring to their customers, to their company, to their suppliers. We need to develop skills and expertise so companies know how to deal with data, to be able to ask the right questions to their technology providers, to make sure that they make the right decisions, privacy, security, and so on. We need to think about ways to overcome resistance, show that the introduction of data and new digital technologies in most cases does not mean that there is a reduction in the workforce, but in most cases it actually means that it can improve your own work, give more satisfaction in work. And finally, there was this big understream where we need to make sure that data is made available, that it is of high quality, and that it can be shared in a secure and trusted way. I remember we're dealing with areas in logistics where we're pretty sure that it will only work if you can effectively share data. We're dealing with maintenance where you need to think about your IoT platforms and how to collaborate or how to connect to all the data sources and use it. And in many cases, security and trust is also of high importance. Think of the medical domain, the health domain, or life sciences. So we need to have the tools available to overcome those barriers. Now that's a momentous challenge. There are lots of things we need to do. to do that, and we definitely cannot do it alone. So in the past few years, several organizations in the south of the Netherlands have come together to try to address this. Governmental organizations, the figures I just showed come from the government report, also others contributed to. So the government felt the need to address this. We as an applied research organization said, well, we might also have some tools and technologies and approaches which we can put into the basket. And this applies to other areas as well. And we were grouped together in what we call the Data Value Center for Smart Industry. Or called here the Data Value Center, which is now a collaboration between research organizations like universities, TNO, JETS, sector organizations, so organizations representing the industries we've seen in the initial picture, FME for the high-tech industry, Brainport Industries representing the high-tech suppliers, the metal union representing organizations active in metal processing, regional development agencies, which are focusing on the regional economic development in particular in the various parts of the south of the Netherlands. And we all sat together in what is now called the Data Value Center. We pull together knowledge, we pull together resources, we pull together money. And this is for us now an important outlet channel to reach SMEs. And our slogan in Dutch, again, SMEs, they want to have the local language. It's called Meerwaarde met data. Translated into English, it will be creating more value through data. And here you can see a geographical overview of this. Again, this is a picture of the south of the Netherlands. The bottom left, you can see the icons of partners which are involved in all of this. We said we need to have some physical hubs across the south where innovations come together, where we can show things, where organizations can come to for meetings, for events, where we can demonstrate things. And they need to be local. We don't want to travel very far to be there. So there's one here in the west, focusing on industry, maintenance, but also on smart energy, because this is where a lot of the chemical companies are based, which need to do that transition. And further here to the middle, we have the Gate 2 campus focusing on maintenance. So a lot of companies active in the field of maintenance. And they have an area there where those companies can be based, but also where things can be tested and demonstrated and developed. Then to the southeast, there is what's called the Brighton Smart Services Campus. So this is really the home for all kinds of software companies which develop smart services. It's also the home, for instance, for the Dutch Blockchain Coalition, using blockchain as a technology. And then when it comes to high tech, there is a large grouping of companies here in the Eindhoven area, in what is called the Brainport Industries campus, both with physical production facilities and innovation facilities to improve this production through data. And last but certainly not least, here in the north, there is in Den Bosch the campus of JETS, where all the students and researchers of JETS come together, and Fabian will talk about that in a moment. Also of interest are all the orange blocks here in the picture, and those are what we call field labs. They are in addition to the hubs. I won't go through them all, but they each focus on a specific topic. And really this is an area where companies come together to take an innovation to the next level. They are often related to one of the hubs, but they focus on a specific technology or a specific development. So for instance, we have when it comes to high-tech manufacturing, a field lab on multi-material 3D printing, or on supply chain innovations, or on improving in-factory logistics. Now this has a physical dimension, of course. For the logistics, you need to have AGVs. For the 3D printing, you need to have 3D printers. But what we recognize is that through all those field labs and in all those hubs, data really is at the center of it. Because those 3D printers, you need data to be able to optimize them and to be able to use them in the best way possible. And this also applies to production logistics and supply chain. So data really is at the heart of all these field lab initiatives and all the hubs and practical facilities we have in the site. Now this is about, let's say, brick and mortar. Now we know about the industries we're focusing on. We know about the geography problems, but what instruments do we put towards this? We characterize them also in alignment with the Digital Europe program into 4 categories. Raising attention, creating interest and desire, putting some things into action, and ensuring that things are actually implemented in real world activities. So attention really is about informing companies about datafication, the base level of awareness, making sure that they know that there is something like data, that they should do something with it, and also to share best practices from different companies. Attention. Secondly, interest and desire. There we really want to engage with companies to take it one step further and say, okay, we are going to develop a plan. What are the next steps we're going to take for our individual company? In action, it is about detailing those plans, providing consultations, creating action plans, so really taking it one step further so that these plans also become actionable. We notice that many companies have an idea about what data can bring to their company after some preliminary investigations, but then it is challenging to really take the next step and say, what is now the call I need to make to my technology provider, or which consultant should I hire, or where should I start? So the action phase is crucially important for that. And finally, when implementing, we know that the skill set of many companies and many entrepreneurs is limited, so they need support in executing their plan. And this is also where the Data Value Center comes into play, providing expert support, having peer-to-peer groups with companies, exchanging things, providing coaching. And this is where also the research institutes come into play, because we have this knowledge and we, from our societal mission, want to make that available to those companies. Now, again, also still a bit theoretical, what does it look like in practice? We've started with this already some 2.5 years ago, so just as Corona entered our day-to-day lives. We had planned to have physical meetings at the Brainport Industries campus and other locations, but obviously that was not possible. So we had to organize several online roundtables, lunch and learn. We actually scheduled it always around 12 o'clock, 12:30, so that people could have a sandwich and watch those sessions, could also watch them on demand. And we grouped their organizations of different natures, different backgrounds, to talk about all kinds of subjects related to datafication. And well, I won't go through them all, but this is just a list of the kinds of topics which were addressed, ranging from questions like, okay, I need to share data digitally with my customers or with my suppliers. What should I do? EDI, data sharing. Where do I start? What kind of security measures do I need to put in place? We had CEOs around the table of those small companies to talk about the organizational commitment, what they do to commit their organization to this, their workers and so on. More dedicated technical sessions, for instance, on IoT or how to use IoT data for maintenance. We've asked one of the telcos to talk about the opportunities that new technologies such as IoT and 5G would bring. But we also talked about more strategic things like, well, we hear a lot about Gaia X as a strategic European topic. But what does this now bring for individual companies? What will be the moment for an individual company to hook into those developments? So it's a large collection. They were well received, even though we had planned to have like big physical audiences. That was not possible due to COVID. We had to do it online, so we had to datafy ourselves also a little bit. And it was really successful. We really had many viewers to those events, and they're also available for replay today. So that really helped us to gain some awareness. It wasn't the only tool, I'll get to that in a moment, but it really helped to do that. All of a sudden, people noticed that, hey, there's something happening with data. There are things which might be able to help me and my organization. So that's where it started. But then that's still the first step. We also need to take the next step. So we introduced what was called the Datakansen Stappenplan. In English, that would be translated as the data opportunities step by step. And we really created this as a physical paper thing, which we could put on the table in a discussion with an SME, and it has 8 steps in it. So it helps you to engage and have the discussion with an SME on where are you now and what can you do. And where are you now really starts with having an SME talking about their situation. What are their immediate threats and concerns? So currently, if we have a conversation now, it is, for instance, on material shortage and on labor shortage or disruptions in the supply chain. Really talking with the business of the SME in mind, and that's where it starts. We talk about the second step about the developments. So what do you see happening in your company and around your company? Maybe other companies are working on datafication. Maybe you have a supplier which wants to do business in a digital way with you. So we note it down. We talk about improvement areas, really specific improvement areas. Is it about the product you're creating? Is it about your processes? Several categories. And then from there, we take it to data. So what could data do to realize those improvements? Because some things, if there's a product design, for instance, that's something an organization needs to do, but maybe data can help to improve the product design. So that's then really the conversation we would like to have with an SME. In the second half, so these are the first 4 steps, but in the second half, we are really moving to the barriers and the actions which an organization needs to take to implement it in the organization. So are you ready for it? Open question, are you ready for it? Do you have the systems in place and the solutions, or are there still other things which need to happen? And if so, is there some sort of staging model? Is there something you could do first? Low-hanging fruit, easy fix, and some things which are maybe more complicated, which you want to do later? Or is it the best thing to do to start with the complicated things in your particular situation? Have a conversation on it. And at the end of the day, it should result really in an action plan for an individual SME. Who will I call after this meeting to take the next step? Now, again, there are large numbers of organizations. So for us, it was undoable to reach them all and have this conversation with each of them individually. So we took a dual approach. On one hand, we provided this tool, and several organizations used this themselves to create their own action plan. But as you can recall, maybe in our network of the Data Value Center, we also have sector organizations, so bodies representing a particular sector. And typically they have representatives in all the various parts of the region who regularly visit those companies. And the same is true for the regional development organizations, economic development organizations. They visit the companies in their area. They have consultants and business developers which have a car, which visit all those companies and have a chat with them on a regular basis. So sometimes it's on a yearly basis, sometimes bi-yearly, and in some cases, if there's a challenging situation at the company, even more. So we took a bit of, let's say, trainer approach, and we said maybe we should help those people who regularly visit all those companies to become what we call a data coach. So sometimes they're a consultant, sometimes they are more what we call an expert. They have different backgrounds, but they should be able to have this conversation with the companies. They should be able to discuss these 8 steps which I just showed, or maybe do that as part of a wider conversation that they already have with that company. And then it goes 2 ways. It allows us to have a much wider reach because we cannot address all those companies. And also the other way around, it allows these organizations to provide a much better service to their members or the companies in their areas. We call them data coaches. We started this a bit later, and we hope to extend this in the next few years. And they really point us towards the new cases, the new groups of companies which require some support from the data value center. And as I said, we do it through a sort of a trainer approach. Now from here, and I know that Fabian will talk about this in more detail in a moment, we really also want to take a next step. So for some organizations, doing those 8 steps, visiting one of the webinars and lunch and learn sessions is already sufficient, and they go ahead and they start exploring and investing in data in their organization. But some organizations want to take it a step further through what we call the Data Readiness program. And in this program, we are bundling several organizations, so they sit together. They are supported through JETS. Again, Fabian will talk about that in a moment. And the outcome is that they have a tangible result. For instance, a dashboard or insight in the data, and really can take it to the next level. It takes more time. It's not one interview or one meeting. It will take a couple of weeks. These organizations also need to invest in this themselves. But it really is an added instrument to improve the data readiness of an individual SME. I think this is a next bridge to Fabian. And Fabian, maybe you can take us through how this works in practice, and also give a bit of a wider introduction to what JETS is and your position in this ecosystem.
Of course. Thank you very much. So I'm Fabian. I'm from the JETS MKB Data Lab, or if you would translate it to English, the JETS SME Data Lab. I just heard in Italian it would be the PMI Data Lab, basically the data lab for SMEs. We are a part of JETS or JETS. We're made possible by the province of North Brabant in the south of the Netherlands, the municipality of Den Bosch, Sertogenbosch, and our 2 mother universities, the University of Tilburg and the University of Eindhoven. JETS you can see more or less as a faculty of both universities, of both Tilburg and Eindhoven, where you have the legal and business expertise of Tilburg and the technical expertise of Eindhoven coming together in a beautiful marriage. We offer master degrees in data science and entrepreneurship. which are 2-year master programs. We have professional education, all kinds of research, PDang, PhDs, and generally we are a mix of both half business, half entrepreneurship, and half data science. And we are part of that. So to the right, we see our team, our lovely team. We are the Sme Data Lab. We are part of YATS knowledge valorization, basically the part of YATS that tries to have a societal impact using the research, using the incredible expertise, the employees that we have available at YATS to do something back for society. What we specifically do in the Sme Data Lab, and how we do it will be in a bit, is that we make data science accessible for SMEs. So what this means is that we try to reduce the application gap for starting with data science. We try to lower the threshold, both financially and with regards to knowledge, on how to start making data science decisions, becoming data-driven and becoming more data-driven. And in short, what we do is that we do inspiration sessions, more or less like these, where we talk to companies in person. Generally, we're talking with SMEs, and we have found that in-person conversations are way more valuable and way more connecting to companies to talk about their challenges, the potential value of data, and whether it would or would not fit in their particular case. We have workshops where we sit together with students and the companies, sit them together to talk about their challenges and come to a concrete kind of project that we could do for them. And the bulk of what we do are short but very explicitly defined projects. For those familiar with agile terminology in sprints of there in about 60 to 80 hours, we do this over a period of about 8 to 10 weeks. The students are freelancers. We help them set up their own freelance company who are executing these projects. And that's also why it's between 8 to 10 weeks. They might have an exam week or etc. So you are working with students. And this costs the SMEs 2,750 euros, where half goes to the student. So the other half is purely for us to break even. In this manner, we have helped in the last 4 years. There are about 120 companies, have done over 240 projects. So many companies also do multiple projects with us. And our current student pool that we draw from is there in about the size of 50 people. So why did we start this, or why did the founders start this? I wasn't there. When YATS was founded 5.5 years ago, we saw basically certain demand from both sides. So with companies, we saw at the start that the big companies, they knew how to find us. The big telecom companies, etc. They knew, oh, there's a new data university. We're going to visit and see if we can do a partnership. But in a bit, we also saw that SMEs started knocking on our door more and more, asking basically the same question every time. I have data. I don't know what to do with it. Can you help me? So on the company side, we saw this demand for, hey, can you help us do something with this data? I know I need to do something with it, but I have no clue where to start or what to do. And on the student side, we saw that they wanted to get more real life work experience while studying, but they were working at a grocery store or at a cafe, which in itself is not a problem. But generally, students just want to get some work experience done before they graduate. It also helps, of course, in getting a new job. And students don't mind money. So we saw these two demands, and then the founder said, hey, we can be the link where we help the companies define the projects, and these projects we bring to the students for them to execute, and we ensure that all of this is executed properly and that actually the companies get what they want and is described in the project proposal. So what exactly do we do? We do more or less 3 things. The first is an intake, which is a free consultation, where we sit together with a company for an hour, me and a colleague, where I am, for example, more of a technical side. Within the data lab, we have half the people more technical, half the people more business. It's chat, where I sit together with a more business-oriented colleague of mine, and we explore the valuable challenges that lay within the company. After we've seen whether or not there are certain challenges, we start to zoom in on a challenge. This is more where I come in and talk more about its technical feasibility, scope, what can we do, is it a big ambition, do we need to cut it up, etc. The specific result of such an intake is that we give advice on what first step to take, and we hand out a project proposal. This is something we write up after the intake and send more or less 1 to 2 weeks afterwards, which clearly defines a first step, a research question, a concrete end result that they would get at the end of a project, and they can do that at our place. So they can do it within a data lab that we find a student to execute it, but they could also find a third party and do it with that. We are part of a university where we're knowledge valorization. We want to help society. So the value here is this project proposal so that they know how to get started. Talking a bit fast, I'll try to slow it down a bit. We also have workshops. In workshops, we sit companies together with students to discuss their data challenges. This is a full day. This is more or less 4 or 5 hours. At the end, a drink, of course. And the end result of this is also a project proposal. This is generally for companies that don't have their data challenges or their data ambitions very clear yet. So we have a longer session to help boil this down to its actual value. Result of this is also a project proposal that they could do with us or a third party, or internally if they hire someone, of course. And lastly, the biggest thing we do, what I already said, projects. These are very carefully demarcated challenges, a clear research question for the student to tackle, a clear end result they have to work towards, which also explicitly will be delivered. That's also where people like I come in to ensure that the scope is small enough and that it will actually be doable. Generally, we're pretty good at that. So if a company comes to the data lab, an SME, and has a certain project proposal, we will deliver the end result that is in the project proposal. So this is more or less what we do. And I thought might as well just give some examples to make it a little bit less in the air. These are just 5 projects that are currently running. The 2 at the bottom are also connected, at least semantically, to the Data Value Center of Smart Industries. But I will just shortly go through all 5 to give you an idea of what we do. MTD Pure Water, is a company that facilitates water infrastructure for both very local Dutch projects in the polder to very big events like I think it was the Winter Olympics in Canada. So they're all over the world as an SME, which is quite interesting. And what they wanted is a dynamic pricing model. The owner of MTD comes from a hotel business background, and there they have dynamic pricing models based on capacity. And MTD wanted to see if they could create something similar. So we took this very big ambition of, hey, we want a dynamic pricing model. We asked, okay, what are the variables that are largely what you build your pricing on? That's largely just their capacity. So we cut that up into multiple chunks, where we're currently building a web scraper for them to get an overview of all events that are upcoming. And then after that, we can use a prediction algorithm on that set of data on what projects are upcoming, what kind of features do they have, to predict the effect on their capacity. And then if they have a small amount of capacity left over, the price will go up. If they have a lot of capacity left over, the price will go down. That's basically it in a nutshell. So we have delineated a track of multiple projects where we, at the end of each project, start looking, hey, is this going the way we want? Yes or no? Do we need to change direction a bit? This is generally how software development works best. To Connect is a company that builds custom cables for, and then the big cables, not the ones that are on my computer right now, for other companies. And currently, for example, if you have a custom built cable that has 10 components, I'm just saying something, it might be that one component is a very critical component, where 9 out of 10 components are already in the warehouse, but there's this one component that will have to wait 3 to 4 weeks for, or maybe even longer, for it to come into the warehouse, due to which the entire product will take much longer to be delivered to the customer than you would like to personally, and all this extra components are just laying around in a warehouse doing nothing. So first they want to classify what are the critical components, because if there's if 10 out of 10 components all take 4 to 6 weeks to be delivered, then it's less critical. But if there's a single component in 10 that takes a long time, it's critical. So first see which are critical, then see how many you need to keep into the warehouse to ensure that you're not taking up too much space, but also not delivering very late on your custom built cables. And then have a model that helps you make this insightful. So that's basically what we did for 2Connect. For EVIA, which is an stichting, I have no idea. It's an organization that is developing an early warning system for breast cancer. The problem with current mammography, which is used to scan the breasts of generally older women for breast cancer, is, first off, it's horrible as an experience. It's just the breast gets flattened painfully, it's uncomfortable, and a lot of women actually get psychological damage because of it, sadly. And it doesn't even work that well for certain types of cancers. And it only works on older women because you need a certain fat percentage in the breast for it to work properly, which only is there and about around the menopause or after women go through menopause. So there's a lot of limitations in that. So they're developing a new tool based on cameras that can detect movement in the breast, and especially deviations in the movement of the breast that could indicate skin cancer, and specifically then breast cancer. We helped them build, using state-of-the-art technologies, using deep learning and convolutional neural networks, to translate the data from movement into a classification algorithm that can, which is a proof of concept for them to get more funding to further develop this, to classify whether or not there's cancer present in a breast or not. So this is more into the medicine part. Look Recruitment is a recruitment office that does, I think, senior and higher, maybe medium and higher positions for companies. And they wanted to gain more insight into their placements they do for various companies. They are incredibly reliant on LinkedIn data. So what we did is build a LinkedIn scraper that's actually within the legal limits of LinkedIn, which is quite a hassle, to get the data on our side, and then start doing some very rudimentary analysis. How long does a certain person stay within a company they place, so that they can talk about loyalty? How well do they place people? They can use that for feedback within themselves, to see when people jump to different companies, when, what kind, etc., to gain more insight in what happens after they place a person at a certain company. So we help them build a web scraper and convert that into a BI tool. Lastly, Merford, also for the Data Value Center, Smart Industries, builds custom-built sound insulation, so both doors, entire cabins, noise control. And what they wanted is a prediction agent that would predict whether or not their custom project would go over budget or not. So we have that, again, big ambition. We want to predict whether or not a certain product is going to go over budget and have an early warning system for that. So the first thing we did in the project was, okay, we're going to look at the data and we're going to see if this is even feasible. So there was an analysis of the data and more or less a proof of concept. Is this possible? that was positive. Yes, we can train a machine learning model on this that will have decent enough results. So in the second project, we built this model. This model was on the entire building of the product. This worked decently well, which Mefford was very happy about. So in the third project, we tried to see, hey, can we build this up in the phases? So you have multiple phases in the building of the cabin, for example. Can we also train the machine learning model on the specific phases? And would that allow us to gain more insight? The answer to that was actually no. This is also, of course, something that can very likely happen in projects. So we found out, no, it does not help the algorithm to look at specific phases in the building of the cabin. So now in the current project, we're building back on what we did in the second project, the more general machine learning model to automate it, automate the learning of the algorithm and integrate it further into the business processes of Mefford, such that they have to use less time, it's less complicated to use the tool. Those were some examples of what we do in the Sme Data Lab, the MKB Data Lab. And from this, we still do so many other things, trend analyses, dashboarding, calendar planning for psychology practices, you name it, we've done it. This is an example of, I think this is actually 2 years old or so, but our examples go everywhere. We basically touch any type of sector that we can help, and we're very happy to do the work we do. We could go to questions if there are any.
Yeah, well, thanks first of all, Fabian, for your interesting presentation. Really nice to see that you really, I mean, this is really about brick and mortar companies doing stuff in the real world. Sometimes people think data scientists is really geeks behind the computers, but these are really companies doing things on, well, breast cancer, organizing events, hiring people, and data is needed there as well. If there are questions, please do raise them through the B2Match platform, so we can take them. I actually have one question for you. So we do all these awareness things, sessions, which I talked about. Then I think it's really good that we're able to send SMEs to JETs if they really want to take the next step, especially if they are not yet up to the maturity level whereby they can easily go to commercial software provider and so on. So I think that positioning is actually quite unique. But in your introduction, you also said that JETs is also working on, let's say, the entrepreneurship of the students themselves. Can you say a few words about that? What are the results on that so far?
Yeah, of course. So within YATS, we place high emphasis on entrepreneurship within our students. And this comes about in multiple ways. Well, clear one within the MKB Data Lab, Sme Data Lab, is that we help them set up their own freelance companies for which they do our projects. So we help them in that. So they also get in touch with consultancy, for example. We have the YATS Playground, JETS Playground, which is an open incubator within YATS that helps students set up their own startups. We also have integrations into the curriculum. So there is a core program that runs through the entire 2-year master's called Data Entrepreneurship in Action, where students learn how to do validation, ideation, go through the entire process of building a startup. The third course in that, Data Entrepreneurship in Action 3, actually also helps students, or where students have to set up their own company and actually pitch to investors.
But doing one of these projects through the SME Data Lab could really be a start also for students to explore this kind of business, I assume.
Yeah,
I can imagine that not for every student in data science, the natural step is to start their own business. But if you've done one of these experiments, then it might be easier to take that step.
Yeah, exactly. It just gives them some actual experience of what it's like to have your own company and how to be entrepreneurial. and then see whether it's for them or not.
All right. Well, thanks for that. You'll stay with us until the end of this session. But at this moment, and again, if there are any questions, do raise them through B2Match or contact us afterwards. I would like to go now to my other colleague, Simon Dalmolen. Share the presentation again. So in the previous sessions, we talked about awareness, how we connect to SMEs. Fabian has shown what we then can do when it comes to experiments and really helping organizations to take the next step. But maybe you can take us through about the role of applied research in this.
Yes, thank you, Matthijs. And also, I think one step back, because today we're discussing about how SMEs can be really beneficial in the big forces that are now being done regarding setting up a data economy. Because also what you see in your own personal life, that within a data economy, where as a private person you're already in with WhatsApp and Facebook and Instagram and everything, if you look into okay, what kind of companies are there? Most of the time American companies. However, the SMEs are of course European smaller companies. And I think we should be really aware, how can we help those SMEs to still be in business within 5 or 10 years? Because the data economy is coming. And I think we have a few characteristics regarding SMEs. I think one is they don't have the big IT budget as the big tech, and they don't have the big R&D budget. So also from a European perspective, we really should help in setting up the data economy in such a way, in such a manner that SMEs can also benefit from it. And it's not the winner takes all platforms that are in there or the other way around. So this is also where I'm really happy with the European strategy on AI and also on data strategy, is saying, well, okay, within all kinds of business operations, you should share data or should be able to share data. However, sharing data also comes with a price. If you take into account that one big platform is coming in, for example, because everything is shared on that specific platform. And that can be a challenge. It's not that it must be a challenge, but it can be a challenge. If you can set up such a data sharing environment, in this case, a so-called data space, where companies can come and go and share data while being in control, the so-called data sovereignty, companies and also private persons should be able to share the data and give consent to specific operations, for example, for ordering, or when you're in a smart manufacturing supply chain, that you're able to share all kinds of data regarding specific products from yourself, but you also should be able to revoke some consent, for example. And if we take that into account, then we can also calculate really easy or make our minds up really easily that SMEs are having a really big challenge in this case. They're actually, when you're looking into a football game, they're already 2-0 behind actually, because it's not easy when you don't have the R&D budget and you don't have the IT budget to invest in, for example. And this is also where we as TNO come in, but also where the European Commission is playing a really important part. And this is also why they came up with the so-called data space. A data space is actually nothing more than setting up a trusted zone where companies, and I hope also in the near future private persons, can share data to enable new businesses, for example. And this is also where we as TNO are also setting up this session for today, but also within the Netherlands itself, is setting up those so-called data spaces. And actually a data space is actually on the business level, setting up ecosystems that are already there, but helping those current ecosystems to be already prepared for the new data economy that's popping up. And with, as said, in your private life, the data economy is already being big business. However, you as a person are the business model, so it's a freemium model. You as a person are actually the data part, but you also should be aware that when setting up companies, it's a bit different. And it's also already really important if you would like to set up those current ecosystems toward the data space, or making them available for the data economy, you should make all kinds of agreements, because it's the same for setting up a highway, for example. In the Netherlands, you're allowed to drive 130 kilometers an hour, and you have some specific exits and you have some specific entries. You need to make some agreements. And that's also what you do for the data spaces. For example, there are 3 things that are really important for interoperability. It's all about identification and authentication and authorization, on all kinds of levels, on a business level, on a legal level, on a technical level, and on a semantic level. So I think that's really important. So Setting up a data space is not easy, but as within TNO we have some experience in a few areas. We will come later to it, but you should also take into account the right party data infrastructures. Okay, what kind of generic enablers do we need or do we require for secure and trusted data sharing, that you're able to become data sovereign, and not only on the data itself, but also on the metadata. And also being said, if you have the technical stuff available, it will also reduce or lower the barriers for collaboration, because it should be in such a way, should be easy for SMEs to connect, to have nearly download an app and already be in business. Of course, that's the utopia in that sense, utopia in that sense, but that's actually what you would like to have to reduce those barriers. So yeah, next slide, please, Matthijs. Also, when you see our role as TNO, how we're actually looking into it, as being said, TNO is a research and technology organization, so we're somewhere in between the companies and the science and all the politics in between. And what we actually do as TNO, we're neutral, and that gives a lot of benefits. Now and then you can be the neutral architect for already diving into existing ecosystems to say, okay, how can we prepare you for the data economy? How can we do that? And we have a few nice examples available within the smart industry, the so-called smart connected supplier network, where we as TNO we're helping them to become ready for the data economy. And it's also where we have a pretty big success story behind it. And I think later on or in the chat we can share some links regarding the smart connected supplier network. I won't dive in too deep, but also as TNO, we're also connected via all kinds of initiatives within Europe. For example, the international data space. This is where we are acting in on the board level, on the architectural level, but also within the Netherlands to set up our own IDS hub. So companies can come for questions or other things, or how to set up such a data space from a technical perspective, but also from a business perspective. And this is where we can help them. We don't have any profit or loss in that sense that we need to make money out of it, but we are a neutral party in that sense. And the same is happening for GaiaX. GaiaX is gaining a lot of momentum at the moment to set up a cloud environment where you can have portability, in that sense that you could switch more easily from a cloud provider. At this moment, a lot of American cloud providers are available, but you also see now becoming more European players available. But how can you as an SME actually switch maybe within a day or within a few weeks from a cloud provider, for example? And GaiaX is also doing the interoperability. This is also why we're a GaiaX member and an IDS member, because those are both, I think, really responsible and may have a lot of impact in setting up the future data space from a technical perspective. But that's all about the preconditions of sharing data and becoming more sovereign. And then you also should ask the question, okay, why are we actually doing this? And a lot of people say, well, AI is the near future and AI is already there. Well, within the Netherlands, we have a really nice initiative. It's called the Dutch AI Coalition. It's everything about AI will come to us, or it's already available to us, but SMEs don't always have the benefits, but sometimes have the disadvantages regarding AI. And the Dutch AI Coalition has as a goal, okay, AI is coming up. How can we help those SMEs in having at least the environment available from a business perspective, from a legal perspective? So you have the ELSA labs regarding ethics and legal. What will be the impact if I have a specific algorithm? What types of algorithms will come up? For example, will the data flow to the algorithm or the algorithm to the data? All kinds of questions are being raised over there, and also try to be not only answered on a scientific manner or from a technical perspective, but really, okay, how can we help, in this case, the Dutch companies, for example. So yeah, next slide. But also, if you have a few examples for building up data space, it's not only within the Netherlands, but also from a European perspective. What we did within the Dutch AI Coalition is setting up from the healthcare all kinds of initiatives for setting up the data space for secondary use of data, because patient is coming to the hospital as with specific things, and the doctor is seeing an illness or something else. When there's nothing in between, it's of course really good. But most of the time we see in the Netherlands a lot of cancer or heart disease, other stuff. But when you have all kinds of patterns, you actually would like to learn from all those specific individual patients. You need to have those big data sets. And in our case, a lot of hospitals were joining the forces within the Dutch AI coalition. For example, for the example of breast cancer, but also for Alzheimer's disease, where we have brain images, is that the images were not allowed to leave the hospital. However, when you could have an algorithm that could learn from all the hospitals, it would be having a lot of benefits in that sense. So what we actually did was setting up a federated learning algorithm, so whereby the algorithm was visiting the hospitals, was learning locally, and the only thing that was being shared amongst the hospitals, or actually amongst the algorithm, was only the learned algorithm configuration. So an algorithm is being installed on several hospitals with all the sovereignty in place and all the controls in place regarding revoke. No data is being shared amongst the hospitals, but the algorithm is actually learning from the hospitals itself. And at the end, you have a better trained algorithm that can be used for classification for breast cancer or Alzheimer's, for example. Well, as already being said, manufacturing, that's a really big thing regarding our digital innovation hubs in the southern Netherlands, because we have the ASMLs and the Philips over there, and all the first, second, and third tier suppliers. And was actually, they were having a really big issue or challenge regarding data sharing messages. So they were coming from the period of EDI. So how can we set up one single messaging type? This is also where the smart connected supply network actually was starting, and in the beginning to set up a semantic standard, a semantic messaging thing regarding purchase to pay. But also afterwards, when that became a big success, the whole ecosystem was actually saying, okay, we also would like to do the next steps regarding data sharing. And this is also where we have now examples of implementing IDS, and that ERP provides actually providing access regarding smart connect supply messages and data sovereignty via the IDS connectors, where I will dive in later on. Yes, Matthijs? Agriculture is really important from our side. We have it's not only agriculture in itself to have in that sense cows to create more milk or other way, but also the precision agriculture. Do we know what the weather will do? Do we know a specific part of the acre needs more water or needs more nitrogen for the growing? But also making the connection, if we have a lot of data available at the local companies, okay, and we're able to connect the data in a secure and trusted manner, we can make more out of it. For example, for reducing food waste. At this moment, a lot of food is being wasted in the restaurants, but also in our own kitchen or in our own garbage, because we see that about 30% of our food is actually being wasted on all kinds of things. By connecting the dots and becoming more aware of each other, we can actually reduce the food waste by giving more visibility in the whole supply chain of the food supply chain. So the farm to fork strategy is also being implemented in the Netherlands from that perspective. And of course, the thing that's really important in the Netherlands, because the Netherlands is all about logistics, is that we also set up a so-called logistic data space where we try to connect all kinds of logistics players in the supply chain, and also becoming more sovereign and on their own data. So that's a few examples that we have. We can later on put our websites in that sense, or some links to specific examples. But from TNO, we actually try to orchestrate innovation and set up data spaces. Maybe in the beginning, set up specific sector data space, but also be aware of the inter-data space connection. And that's actually what we did with a Japanese company, NTT, that will be demonstrated the upcoming week at Hannover Messe. So that's also what we try to do. It's not only the sector itself, where we have data interoperability agreements and also on business and legal perspective agreements, but also amongst data spaces, because as an SME, most of the time you're acting in multiple sectors, and we really need to lower the barrier regarding innovation. It's on the business level, it's on the legal level, but also helping them on the technical part. And I think at this moment it goes pretty well in that sense regarding also connecting the SMEs instead of only the big tech. Yeah. So coming back to this picture, I already mentioned the left part, the business part a lot, but I would like to zoom in a little bit on the right part, on the data infrastructure. I mentioned already things like IDS and IX, but I would like to explain, okay, what is a data space from a technical perspective? This is a picture from the international data spaces. And as being said, the starting point for setting up a data space is that you always have data at the source and you share it unless. And the unless part is when you're having actually give consent to a specific partner or specific organization in your ecosystem. If you translate it from that perspective, you always have a data owner or a data owner with a data provider who's actually providing the data and someone who is consuming the data. So that can be a company or an analysis or an algorithm that actually requires the data, in this case, consuming the data from one or more sources, and is being able to use the data and give or that got consent on using the data for a specific purpose. If you then zoom a bit deeper in, okay, what do we really need for that? Well, I already said it in the beginning, we need identification and authentication. This is where we have the identity provider in between, who's actually providing an identity to the data provider and the data consumer and the data owner. And it's also being provided by IDS, but also GAIA-X is giving a clear role in it. What we also need is the brokering. And this is really important for the SMEs in the near future. So we have a broker on a technical level, and the connectors can find each other, but we also should have a brokering on the yellow page. And this is also where the EU Hubs for Data projects comes in with the catalog and other stuff. Okay, that SMEs have the opportunity to find each other. Okay, what kind of services do we have? And also on a business level, of course, we can also have a yellow pages, but this is more on a technical part. So you have a unique identifier for finding yourself. Another thing that's really important is the clearinghouse. For example, when a data consumer and a data provider are sharing data amongst each other, and there will be a dispute regarding, for example, a misuse for the data consumer, that you have specific policies, data sharing policies or usage policies, and that you can ask the clearinghouse, for example, okay, what was actually being shared and what was actually being happened. An important thing to discuss over here, around things are central roles. So the roles from a governance model are centralized, but the implementation is decentralized, the so-called federated approach. So you could have a clearinghouse as a central role, but implementation is a decentralized thing. So that's not other people are aware what's actually happening in the clearinghouse in that sense. That's important. And also the vocabulary is really important, the semantics. That's what we had the example of within the smart industry, within the smart connected supplier network, where you should have messaging standards or at least semantic standards to be aware, okay, what are we going to share? And also on what specific part are you willing to give authorization to a data consumer for using the data? So that's also important. Another thing that's also important, for example, within smart manufacturing is the Industry 4.0. It's gaining a lot of momentum within from a German perspective. Within the Netherlands, we're really happy with the Industry 4.0 approach in that sense, where semantic standards are being pushed. For example, the asset administration shell, so that companies can access their own data, machine data within their own factory already, but also are able to share those machine data from one factory to a specific, for example, maintenance provider within your own ecosystem or other things. So that's, I think, really important to mention. It's not only about the IDS Connect itself, but especially the so-called data apps on top, the semantics on top, that are really important. So yeah, the Industry 4.0, I'm really happy with that for setting on the semantic standards on collaboration. So that's a bit on the technical part that's in between. Yeah, thank you, Matthijs. I think we can proceed with this part. STNO, we're involved, as being said, in the IDS approach, IDS initiative, but also within GAIA-X. A lot of things already being open source. IDS connectors can be downloaded open source. As TNO, we also have a reference implementation for setting up a whole data space. We've done it several times within all kinds of sectors or branches. In the near future, we will have our reference implementation also open source in that sense. So everyone can also be connected. An important thing that's also being important to mention is that within IDS, we have a so-called plug fest. So when other companies or other organizations also have their own implementation available, the plug fest is actually is the link to always be interoperable. So this is where you can check your own connector or your own implementation. Are we interoperable with the others? So this is also for the interoperability, as being mentioned in the beginning, is important to be aware of. So it's not a TNO implementation and another implementation, but you should always be aware that it should be interoperable. We have a test and validation environment online, especially for the smart manufacturing, the so-called project of digital fabrics, and having a whole test and validation environment online. Yes, please proceed, Matthijs. As being mentioned in the beginning of the presentation, we have a lot of coaching and testing available, because what we actually require is a multidisciplinary team. It's not only the technical people who are thinking in the binary level, but you should always also keep in mind the business. Why are we actually doing it? But we also know from experience, getting all those people in one room can now and then be challenging. So guidance in those multidisciplinary approaches is really important. Yeah. Yeah, and of course, stimulating market adoption, but it's already being done from the beginning. I really like the example of the Smart Connect Supply Network, where from the beginning we had a commercial IT service provider within the same room. So it's the first and second tier suppliers who are actually having the pain, but the ERP providers were in the same room, also being connected, and also to check out, okay, what can be your next market thing. So in short, a small recap of our role as TNO, but also what we've done in the past and also currently doing, is starting the innovation as an innovation orchestration in that sense, and starting with general reference implementations that are available. So not sector specific always, but starting with the general one, acting as a neutral architect in that sense, and also already start from the beginning at day zero, already have the end consumer available, in a sense who really needs to make use of the software of the propositions from the beginning. So it's not only a technology push in that sense. So I would like to give the word back to Matthijs. Thanks
for this great overview, Simon. Actually, I have one question for you at this stage. You shared the neutral role that we as TNO as an RTO can have, and you talked about the technical building blocks you need for a data space. But is there a point where you could say, okay, this is where it ends for, let's say, research and companies like TNO, and this is where it begins for commercial software providers?
Yeah, I think when I go back 2 or 3 years ago, it was a lot of MacGyvering in that sense in the beginning for setting up, because this is a really broad discussion at the moment, because it's really radical innovation in the sense that if you would like to set up a data space, you first have the cost before having the benefits. So that's also our role as an RTO. We need to invest in it from also from the Dutch government to make it available, the so-called digital highway. And from there on, I think the cars or the companies can connect. But we should be aware to make the distinction that the digital highway should be supported in the near future by commercial companies who are actually offering the digital highway, in this case, the IDS connectors, for example. But on the other hand, we also should have the cars, the so-called data apps available. And I think that's also why we need to have a few reference implementations as being done within the Smart Connected Supplier Network by the SSN standard, but also the Industry 4.0 standard by using the Asset Administration Shell. So you should have a few lighthouse examples available, and not only examples, but also code in that sense, open source, that companies can use for adoption. And from there on, I think the process can speed up. And this is also where we as TNO can go back a little bit. So that's important. I think at this moment, we're on specific sectors at the stage that already telcos or other providers could step in for supporting or maintaining the digital highway and helping SMEs and other companies for setting up new cars.
I think this is an important addition. Also from a data value center point of view, we shouldn't just target at the end of the day, that is where we wanted to land, but it is the real world end users. We should also make sure that this market offering comes into play and gets stimulated as well. So thank you for that. Maybe to conclude today's session, just a few numbers. I mean, this is a road we've been traveling in together with Jets and others for a couple of years now. Well, as long as we had COVID, that's approximately when we started this. We had really hundreds of organizations involved in the events, in the lunch and learn, and so on. and we're trying to widen the scope every day. And the data coaches that I talked about in the beginning are an important instrument to that. We know that over 400 organizations were provided with this data opportunities scan. Of course, we cannot follow up on each and every one of them individually. Fortunately, we don't have to do that because many companies do the scan, they make their own plan, and they take their own initiative. Nevertheless, we had about 150 organizations in all, which we were able to support directly, either from JETS or TNO or one of the other partners involved, through small series consultancy or otherwise through larger projects. Well, we have many students also supporting these projects as the future data entrepreneurs. And we're really happy with that. So we're also building the skill set needed for it. And together with all the regional initiatives, we've been able to build a sizable number of collaborative projects. The Smart Connected Supplier Network is one of the lighthouses in that, focusing on supply chain innovation. But we have several others as well on topics like maintenance, improvements in several domains. And we were able to set up collaborative projects really to set the foundations for maybe a data space in that surrounding, or by looking with this group of companies to the question how to connect to a larger group of data spaces. And we hope to continue this journey so far. For us, this has an increasing European dimension. I mean, we have the local reach in the Netherlands. We know these companies. We're working with those regional development agencies and with the sector organizations. But the innovations, and particularly what Simon just talked about, they come from Europe. And there we really feel the need to work together on a European level to get to know what is happening in other digital innovation hubs across Europe. The BDVI spaces and the EU hubs for data projects are really instrumental for that. Same goes for AI. Of course, we have our Dutch AI coalition. Of course, we have machine learning and algorithms locally. We also know that there is the AI on demand platform in Europe. We want to connect to that, and this European collaboration is instrumental for that. And particularly also for the projects we do in manufacturing, we have a wide presence there and an intensive collaboration with, for instance, the platform Industry 4.0 to take those new Industry 4.0 standards and use them in a data space context. Finally, I would like to mention that this was also recognized, Gaia-X, when it comes to manufacturing. Of course, there are initiatives across Europe, but the Netherlands was identified as a hub for Gaia-X for manufacturing. We're really happy with that, so that we can try and test the concepts coming from Gaia-X and so see how they can land in Europe. Finally, I'd like to mention here the Digital Europe program, which is on one hand supporting digital innovation hubs through the European digital innovation hubs. On the other hand, also supporting the capacity building for data spaces in many different domains. And we really hope to be and planning to be a landing space for Digital Europe in the southern part of the Netherlands. Now, European collaboration in this sense for us is not a goal in itself, but really a strategic instrument to improve the service offering we have. So reusing tools and best practices which were developed elsewhere, connect those Southern Netherlands initiatives to other initiatives in Europe, and by doing so widening the market for the solutions developed there, and also to widen the market for European solutions, as Simon mentioned. We could fill many more sessions about this, and we won't do that today. After this session at 11 o'clock, there will be a session with some practical examples from the EU Hubs for Data project. But to close off this session, I would like to share some of the best practices we would like to give you from working a couple of years now in this data value center approach. First of all, attention, interest, action, implement. Having this whole scope of activities is important. And the Digital Europe program is also stimulating digital innovation hubs to have this whole set of instruments. Nevertheless, we do think it is important to build specific instruments for each stage. So really having a plan for those lunch and learn sessions, having a plan for the action plans I talked about for the individual entrepreneurs, having a plan for supporting the entrepreneurs, for instance, through the SME Data Lab, or by providing them with the technical components that Simon talked about. You have to make it specific. That is what worked for us. Secondly, of course, we know that with those instruments we can take away many of the barriers for datafication, but you also need to think about the quality of data and the secure and trusted sharing of data. I'm absolutely convinced that there will be a lot of reluctance to sharing of data if this is not in place. And the initial study also showed that this is a fear of many SMEs. On the other hand, we also need to make sure that there is a market offering of technological enablers. It's nice that we have IDS and Gaia-X producing architectures and diagrams, but at the end of the day, you should be able to buy it from your local technology service providers. So in the Data Value Center, we also feel the need to ensure that this market offering is in place and to work with local technological service providers so that they can innovate their products as well, that they can be a provider of, IDS Connect or Gaia-X compliant cloud solutions. On a European level, these initiatives will not fly if we do not succeed here on a local level to get a market offering from the ground. Thirdly, it is very easy to say to SMEs, you need to establish a data space, but that is going to be very difficult. So you need to have mechanisms in place to orchestrate this, to have multiple companies around the table, work with them, identify the interoperability agreements among them, and set up a data space in that way. And we've been fortunate enough as a neutral intermediary, as an RTO, to play an important role in that, as well as in establishing the connection between multiple data spaces. For example, if you're working in logistics, you might deliver to a company in high tech, so then you need to be part of 2 different data spaces. We've been able to help them with that from a neutral role. And finally, we're a research company. Jats is coming from a university background, so we all have our own backgrounds for now. And then it is impossible to set up a reach out structure to reach all the thousands of companies which are out there. So what really helped us was to leverage the existing contacts that companies already had with their own sector organization, with the educational institutions they work with the regional development agencies, which were visiting them from time to time. Those are trusted people, and we think it's important to engage also with them to reach the wide audience of SMEs. So these are some of the takeaways from my point of view. We hope that this industry will become more digital in the next years to come. We have a successful track record in doing that, but we also know that there are still many more businesses which need to be convinced, which needs to create action plans, and which need to become part of this. If you want to know more, these are our contact details. Feel free to contact us or leave a message through the chat. It was a pleasure to being with you here today. And I would like to give the floor back to Mattia for the next session on some practical examples from EU hubs for data. Thank you all for joining, and hope to see you soon. Thank you so much.